Theft Redoer. Redoer? Whatever. Time Theft Redoer is a monster of the XYZ category. Xyz? XYZ? Again, whatever. A monster type that comes from the extra deck. Time Theft Redoer himself seems to stem from an archetype of time theft monsters that seems to be based off of the European UK hit series Doctor Who. Redoer himself being inspired by the 3rd and 12th Doctor. And I'll fully admit, I am not really into Doctor Who. Again, it seems to be more of a European thing, but of course, like most things, there are fans worldwide. But we're not here to talk about Doctor Who today. The time theft archetype in and of itself seems to predominantly be a huge support for these XYZ monsters, searching for their own cards, while using various other effects that include fueling up their XYZ boss monsters with more material, typically forward doer. Mainly for the reasons we're about to get into right now. Starting out with the main reason why any card from the extra deck ever sees play in Yu-Gi-Oh! It is generic. 2 level 4 monsters. If your deck can literally spit out 2 level 4s in one turn, you got Time Theft Redoer. And a whole bunch of rank 4s from the XYZ toolbox. Once per turn, during the standby phase, you can attach the top card of your opponent's deck as XYZ material. Now already we have a very interesting effect that almost no other card really has. In fact, I can't think of anything off the top of my head or anything I've seen in the last 10 years of Yu-Gi-Oh! That actually has an effect like this. Possibly ever. Let me know in the comments below if you've ever seen an effect like this. I don't think there is one. This, of course, leads to very interesting scenarios. I actually remember the last time I used Time Theft Redoer. Funny enough, I actually took my opponent's smoke grenade from the top of his deck. So that was pretty neat. Also, take note that it merely says the standby phase. That means any standby phase. Yours and your opponent's. Gotta love that non-specific effect conditioning. Quick effect. That means it's a spell speed 2 effect. So it'll be pretty quick to resolve. You can detach up to 3 different types of materials from this card that apply the following effects, depending on what was detached. Monster. Banish this card until the end phase. Spell. Draw 1 card. Trap. Place 1 face-up card your opponent controls on top of the deck. You can only use this effect of Time Theft Redoer once per turn. Meaning you can't really spam multiple of these things, but that doesn't necessarily matter. Because just 1 Time Theft Redoer already gives you a wild array of pretty good effects. Having the ability, as long as it has a monster card as materials, to always be able to use a Psyframe Lord Omega type effect of banishing itself, pretty much removing itself from almost anything your opponent could throw at it, except of course a kaiju, but we'll get into that when we go into why this card isn't perfect. While if it catches a spell or trap card on the top of your opponent's deck, all of a sudden you have both Upstart Goblin without having to pay the life points, and you even have a Phoenix Wing Blast. All while every standby phase, Time Theft Redoer is just cycling through material, essentially just nabbing anything that's on top of the opponent's deck. All this making it one of the most interesting Xyz monsters in the entire game. Now that we understand exactly what this card does, why is it that I think that this card is secretly OP? Or really just a good card slash pack that could be considered under the radar? Aside from its ability to constantly refuel its material, basically making it so you don't even need its own archetype to keep refueling its Xyz material, I feel as though this card is actually very good at keeping up with your opponent, depending on the type of deck they are playing. Now you see, every time you start a new round with a new opponent, you never really know what they're going to be playing. That's why I feel like Time Theft Redoer is good for first matches, especially if you go first. And if you're able to get it out, you can summon Time Theft Redoer and pretty much get an idea as to what they're playing before they even start their turn, as you literally get to skim their top card. So if you get one of their monsters, well, you have a very good idea as to what archetype you're playing up against. You snag one of their traps. Most decks that run traps nowadays are decks that very much rely on their traps, so you might know what you're going up against as soon as you see that first trap card. Spells? Well, a lot of decks use spells, but here's the thing. If you get their trap card while they're using a trap-based deck, and of course, trap cards take a turn to set, you're able to not only get an idea idea as to what they're playing, because Time Theft Redoer is a quick effect, unless of course your opponent has or can activate the Infinite Impermanence from hand, you'll be able to get most of your effects off before they're able to even respond, especially if they're playing a trap-based deck. Now you have not only insight, but now you also have the ability to respond with these traps. Most likely. If you have a spell card, now most spell cards are consistency plays. If not, they're typically power plays, like Dark Hole, Raigeki, or any staple in an archetype. Think a lot of decks that really rely on their spell cards. Think of Sky Striker. How many times do they have to use a spell card in order to make a play? Like, that's pretty much what the deck does. Summons Ray or the other new one, uses them to link off into a link summon, uses a bunch of spell cards. Being able to not only chain against most of those spell cards, and being able to sort of sap some of them off top of the deck isn't bad. Of course, the moment you detach it, they'll have more spells in the grave, but I digress. You'll also get a draw when you take these spell cards. Again, maintaining a sense of consistency, which drawing cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is never bad, so how can you hate it? Now, I do have to bring up that quick play spell cards and trap cards could be used to be chained in response to Time Theft Redoer, since, they're all spell speed 2s, and chains resolve backwards. So the last card to be activated will be the first that goes off. But I like to think that, especially if you put this into some consistent rogue deck, maybe even a meta deck, that by basically using Time Theft Redoer's effects to screw your opponent, if they're willing to use the extra resources to get rid of it, and you still have a bunch of power plays that your archetype is capable of doing, that has to account for something, right? I mean, they use more cards than really necessary to take this thing out, and now you might be able to potentially pull off what your deck actually does without much of the way of interruption. Now, of course, being chained against isn't this card's only weakness. Of course, if you can't go into the Xyz's play, this card is going to be downright useless. Also, kaijus and anything that basically tributes the monster for cost before it gets to resolve. Yeah, this card isn't going off then either. So pick what deck you use this card up against wisely. Like I said, this is a card that I feel like is very good for round 1, turn 1. You pretty much get to see what your opponent is going to whip at you before they potentially do it. And if they kaiju it, well, you know that at the very least they're running kaijus against you. Something to also keep in mind: be careful when you're attacking with this thing. Because yeah, it's a quick effect, but it still can't be chained during the damage step. So it's a pretty good offensive defensive card, but if you use it to attack anyways, just be careful. The fact that this card on its own can recycle a bunch of Xyz material is pretty much what makes this card really good, even in decks that isn't Time Theft in and of itself. Although, of course, if you do run it in Time Theft, you get the added bonus of always being able to use the Omega effect of just banishing it from the field. But in any other deck, there's still a good chance you might just mill the monster anyways and still be able to grind your way through preserving Time Theft Redoer, basically just making your opponent wince while you're just constantly recycling this thing. So it also kind of makes it trolly too, which I think is hilarious. Now this is the part where I bring up the fact that not 3 weeks from now we're going to be getting a new base set, Phantom Rage, which is going to have a bunch of brand new cards for the Xyz mechanic, along with the cover card being a remake that may very well get its own secretly OP episode. Although it's a little too soon to decide, and to be honest with you, considering its OTK potential, it very well could be a part of the meta. Look out for the new Dark Rebellious. But concerning Time Theft Redoer, you never know. Maybe this set will give some players some initiative to see what this card can truly do. I doubt it will be the meta or anything, but a contender? That's what this show's all about, baby. Giving Rogue its fair due? Hell yeah. As I truly think this card is secretly OP. So if you're ever in near completion of a deck of yours, and you notice you have one slot that you could fit an extra deck monster in, and level 4s are easy for your deck to produce, maybe give Time Theft Redoer a shot. Alright kiddies, that's gonna be it for today's episode of Secretly OP. What do you guys think of Time Theft Redoer?